Picture a corridor so narrow that your shoulders touch both walls, so dark that your hand disappears in front of your face. The air is thick with limestone dust, and the only light is a single oil lamp behind your head. The only sound is the ring of a bronze axe against solid rock. You are 80 feet underground. You have been swinging for months. And you do not know if the team coming from the other side is 10 feet away, or if they missed you entirely and you are digging into nothing. This tunnel is real. It is beneath the streets of modern-day Jerusalem, 1,750 feet long, cut through limestone in total darkness, with a gradient so precise, 0.06% over the entire length, that modern engineers using laser-guided equipment would struggle to replicate it. But this tunnel was not built by architects or surveyors. It was carved by desperate men swinging bronze pickaxes, because the most terrifying army the ancient world had ever seen was marching toward their city. And they had weeks, not years, to finish. And when it was finished, when the water finally flowed, God was not impressed. He was angry. Today, we are going deep beneath the city of David to uncover the greatest engineering feat of the ancient world, the bone-chilling siege that made it necessary, and the terrifying prophetic warning that has been buried inside it for 2,700 years. And what we find at the end of that tunnel will change the way you read the New Testament. To understand why this tunnel exists, you have to understand what was coming. And what was coming was not just an army. It was an empire that had perfected the art of erasing nations from the face of the earth. The Neo-Assyrian Empire, headquartered in the great city of Nineveh, was the undisputed superpower of the 8th century BC. Under kings like Tiglath-Pileser III and Shalmaneser V, the Assyrians had developed a war machine unlike anything the ancient world had ever seen. Their armies were massive, their siege tactics were advanced, but their most devastating weapon was psychological. The Assyrians did not merely conquer, they deported. Entire populations, men, women, children, uprooted from their ancestral lands and scattered across the empire. The goal was not just military victory, it was the complete annihilation of national identity. And in 722 BC, that weapon was turned on Israel. The northern kingdom, 10 of the 12 tribes, fell to the Assyrian army. Samaria, their capital, was besieged, breached, and emptied. The people were marched into exile in Halah, in Habor, and in the cities of the Medes. They never returned. Because the kings of Israel, as the scripture tells us, did not obey the voice of the Lord their God, but transgressed his covenant. 2 Kings 18:12. 10 tribes gone. Not conquered, erased. Think about what that means for one family. A mother in Samaria, carrying her youngest child, walks into exile on a road she has never traveled. Her husband is dead or separated. The Assyrians split families deliberately. She will never see her home again. Her grandchildren will grow up speaking a foreign language, praying to foreign gods. They will not know the name of the village where their grandmother was born. They will not know the songs she used to sing at the well. That is what Assyria did. And now Assyria turned south. The surviving southern kingdom of Judah, smaller, weaker, desperately alone, watched the smoke rise from the north. And on the throne in Jerusalem sat a young king named Hezekiah. Hezekiah was not his father. His father, Ahaz, had been a coward and an idolater who had voluntarily submitted to Assyria and desecrated the temple with foreign gods. But when Hezekiah took sole power around 716 BC, he proved to be a radical reformer. He purified the temple. He smashed the idols. He centralized worship. He was bold, faithful, and fearless. And in 705 BC, when the Assyrian king Sargon II died in battle and rebellion rippled through the empire, Hezekiah made the most dangerous decision of his life. He stopped paying tribute to Nineveh. The Assyrian response was apocalyptic. Sargon's son, Sennacherib, launched a massive campaign in 701 BC to crush the rebellion. He swept through the Levant like fire. Kings surrendered and kissed his feet. Cities that resisted were obliterated. Sennacherib's own royal annals, preserved on a hexagonal clay prism now in the British Museum, boast that he conquered 46 of Hezekiah's fortified cities and trapped the king in Jerusalem like a caged bird. Hezekiah paid a staggering ransom, 300 talents of silver and 30 talents of gold. He sawed the gold overlay off the doors of the Holy Temple to meet the demand. But Sennacherib took the gold and kept marching. 200,000 soldiers, heading straight for the gates of Jerusalem. And Hezekiah faced a problem that no amount of gold could solve. Jerusalem's ancient core, the city of David, sat on a narrow limestone ridge south of the Temple Mount. Its steep valleys made it nearly impregnable against direct assault. But the city had one fatal vulnerability, a vulnerability that every military commander in the region knew about: the Gihon Spring. It was Jerusalem's only source of fresh, flowing water, and it sat entirely outside the city walls. The Gihon was no ordinary spring. Its name comes from the Hebrew root giha, meaning gushing forth. It was a karstic, siphonic spring. Water accumulated deep underground in a subterranean cave, then erupted in powerful surges, 3 to 5 times a day in winter, once a day in autumn. You could hear it. The ground trembled when it burst. It produced 600,000 cubic meters of water annually. And this spring was not just utilitarian, it was sacred. It was at the Gihon Spring that King Solomon himself had been anointed to the throne of Israel. 1 Kings 1:33-34. The place where the Davidic dynasty was confirmed, the pulse of the city. But the Gihon sat at the bottom of the Kidron Valley, 175 feet below the city walls, completely exposed. And when 200,000 Assyrian soldiers arrived, they would find an oasis of abundant water to sustain a siege that could last months, while the people trapped inside the walls would die of thirst within days. The chamber was underground, cut into the bedrock beneath the palace. Oil lamps threw unsteady light across the faces of Hezekiah's officers and engineers. Outside, the sound of hammering echoed off the stone. The broad wall was still under construction, a massive emergency fortification over 23 feet thick, built so urgently that workers had demolished civilian homes to lay its foundations. Hezekiah stood over a clay map of the city. His officers waited. Every man in that room understood the problem. The walls could hold. The armory was stocked. But water was the one thing they could not manufacture behind sealed gates. The spring. If they find the spring. He did not let himself finish the thought. The spring. Hezekiah's plan was as audacious as it was, by every measure of the era, technically impossible. He would seal the Gihon Spring's upper outlets entirely, deny the enemy a single drop, and he would divert the water underground through 1,750 feet of solid limestone bedrock to a new reservoir built safely inside the walls, the Pool of Siloam. 2 teams of laborers would start from opposite ends and carve through the rock until they met in the middle. An officer at the back of the room exhaled slowly through his nose. He looked at the man next to him. Neither spoke. The distance on the map looked impossible. The silence said what neither of them would say aloud. As 2 Chronicles 32, 3-4 records, the king decided with his officers and warriors to cut off the supply of water from the springs which were outside the city. Why should the kings of Assyria come and find plenty of water? It had never been done before, not at this scale, not under this pressure, and the clock was already running. Have you ever faced a problem so massive that the only solution seemed impossible, and the clock was already ticking? The tunnel was barely 2 feet wide. A man could not fully extend his arms. He pressed his shoulders against the cold limestone walls and swung, bronze against stone. The ring of the pickaxe echoed down the corridor behind him and died in the blackness ahead. The oil lamp, mounted on a ledge behind his head, threw a shaking shadow that looked larger than he was, a giant swinging endlessly at a wall that would not yield. Limestone dust filled his lungs with every blow. The air was thick, warm, barely breathable. Somewhere far behind him, another man hauled rubble in a leather sack back toward the entrance, bent double, scraping his back raw against the rough ceiling. And somewhere ahead, somewhere in the blackness beyond the reach of the flame, another team was swinging toward him. He could not hear them, not yet. The only sound was his own breathing, the metallic ring of the axe, and the slow drip of water seeping through a crack in the stone above his head. Swing. Again. Again. How much rock? How much? He stopped the thought. Don't count. Just swing. He did not know how much further. None of them knew. They only knew that 200,000 Assyrian soldiers were coming, and if this tunnel was not finished before they arrived, every man, woman, and child in Jerusalem would die of thirst behind walls that could not save them. What these men accomplished in the dark remains one of the most staggering engineering feats of the pre-classical world. The completed tunnel runs 1,750 feet, roughly 1/3 of a mile, along a winding S-shaped path through solid limestone bedrock. Had they cut a straight line, the distance would have been only 1,070 feet. The actual tunnel is 40% longer than a direct route. But the most astonishing metric is the gradient. In order for gravity to pull the water from the spring to the pool without creating an uncontrollable flood, the slope had to be incredibly shallow, but perfectly consistent. The engineers achieved an altitude difference of a mere 12 inches over the entire 1,750-foot span, a gradient of 0.06%. This is so precise that modern hydrologists have difficulty explaining how Iron Age laborers, working in total darkness without GPS, laser levels, or surveying equipment, could have achieved it. How did they navigate? 2 theories dominate. Geologist Dan Gill proposed that the engineers followed a natural karstic dissolution channel, a pre-existing fissure in the limestone carved by water over millennia. This elegantly explains the winding S-shaped path, the variations in ceiling height, and the several false starts near the meeting point, where workers momentarily lost the natural seam and had to backtrack. Other scholars argue the teams used acoustic sounding, hammering on the rock at intervals and following the reverberations to guide their digging. The truth is likely both. Following natural geology where possible, and using sound to navigate the final, terrifying convergence in the dark. But the most incredible part of this tunnel is not how it was built. It is what was carved into the wall when it was finished. In 1880, a 16-year-old boy named Jacob Eliyahu was wading through the waters of the tunnel. He slipped. he fell into the dark water. And as he rose, dripping, his hand brushed the eastern wall, and he felt something that was not natural rock. Letters, ancient letters, carved into the stone 19 feet from the southern outlet. The Siloam inscription. 6 lines of classical Paleo-Hebrew script dating to approximately 700 BC, one of the oldest and most significant archaeological artifacts ever discovered in the land of Israel. And what it says is bone-chilling. While the stonecutters were lifting the axe, each man toward his neighbor, and while there remained 3 cubits to be cut, the voice of a man could be heard calling out to his neighbor. And on the day when the tunnel was being cut out, the stonecutters struck each man in front of his neighbor, axe against axe. And the waters from the source flowed into the pool for a distance of 1,200 cubits. 3 cubits, roughly 4.5 feet of rock between them. The man on the south side stopped swinging. He pressed his ear against the cold stone. Nothing. Then, a faint vibration. Not a sound exactly, a tremor in the rock. He held his breath, and then he heard it. Metal against stone. From the other side. He shouted. A voice came back, muffled, distorted by 4 feet of limestone, but unmistakable. A human voice. He did not know the man's name. He would never know it. But it was the most important sound he had ever heard in his life. They adjusted. They struck. And axe met axe. The inscription uses a rare Hebrew word, zadah, that appears nowhere else in the entire biblical vocabulary. Some translate it as side deviation, describing the physical overlap where the 2 tunnels met at an abrupt right angle. Others connect it to the Arabic root zadah, meaning to aim correctly. Even the language of the breakthrough defies simple explanation. But what few people know about this inscription is what makes it utterly unique in the ancient Near East. In a world of royal propaganda, where every Assyrian king carved his name in stone, where every Egyptian pharaoh demanded monuments to his divine power, the Siloam inscription mentions no king, no god, no conquest. It is a monument dedicated entirely to the anonymous laborers, the men who swung in the dark, the men whose names we will never know. As 2 Kings 20:20 summarizes Hezekiah's legacy, now the rest of the acts of Hezekiah and all his might, and how he made the pool and the conduit, and brought water into the city, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the Kings of Judah? The water flowed, the pool of Siloam filled, the city was secure. Hezekiah had done the impossible. But 150 miles to the north, the Assyrian army had already begun to move. The water flowed, the broad wall stood, the armory was stocked, the spring was sealed. Every human preparation had been executed with astonishing precision and courage. Hezekiah had thought of everything. But there was a man in Jerusalem who saw what the king could not see. Isaiah stood on the western section of the new wall and looked down over the city. Below him, Jerusalem was a hive of frantic motion. Masons hauled stones for the broad wall. Soldiers sharpened swords in the armory courtyard. Runners carried messages between work crews. The sound of hammering rose from every quarter, from the wall, from the tunnel entrance, from the forges. The whole city smelled of sweat and fresh-cut stone and iron on the grind wheel. But Isaiah's eyes were not on the workers. They were on the temple. Its doors were closed. Its courtyard was empty. No one had entered all morning. The entire city was building. No one was praying. They are building, all of them building, and not one of them is looking up. In Isaiah 22, 8-11, the prophet catalogs every preparation. Listen carefully. This is one of the most devastating passages in the Old Testament. You looked to the weapons of the house of the forest. They inspected the armory. You saw that the breaches in the city of David were many, and you collected the waters of the lower pool. They checked the walls. They secured the water. You tore down houses to fortify the wall. They demolished homes to build the broad wall. You made a reservoir between the two walls for the water of the old pool. The Tanna, the masterpiece, the pool of Siloam filled with diverted water. And then the indictment. 5 words that change everything. But you did not look to its maker, nor did you have respect for him who fashioned it long ago. Isaiah 22:11. Think about that. His best work, his masterpiece, the most brilliant engineering feat of the ancient world, and God said, "You forgot me." Isaiah's critique is not that preparation is wrong. God never condemns wisdom or diligence. The sin was something far more subtle and far more dangerous. Carnal confidence. The people of Jerusalem had placed their faith entirely in solutions they had fashioned with their own hands. The bronze pickaxes, the thick walls, the underground water, rather than looking to the Creator who provided the water and who alone had the power to save them. The tunnel was brilliant. The strategy was flawless. But somewhere in the process of building, they had stopped praying. Somewhere between the first swing of the pickaxe and the last, they began to believe that the tunnel itself would save them. And the severity of God's response is staggering. Isaiah 22:14. This iniquity will not be atoned for you until you die. No atonement. Not for the generation that built with their hands and forgot with their hearts. Imagine the man who calculated the tunnel's path, the one who figured out how to drop the elevation by only 12 inches over 1,750 feet and got it right. He would live to see the city saved, but he would also live knowing that the greatest work of his life was the thing that grieved God. Every time he passed the entrance to the tunnel, every time he heard the water flowing beneath his feet, he would remember, "This is my masterpiece, and this is my failure." He carried both for the rest of his life. The last word of Isaiah's indictment had barely faded when a new sound reached the city. Low at first, like distant thunder. But thunder does not get louder. Thunder does not have rhythm. This sound had rhythm. This was boots. 200,000 pairs of boots.
The Assyrian army did not just surround the city. They weaponized language. Sennacherib sent his field commander, the Rabshakeh, to stand just outside the walls. And instead of speaking in Aramaic, the diplomatic language, the Rabshakeh spoke in Hebrew, loudly, so that every man, woman, and child standing on the wall could hear every word. He mocked their alliance with Egypt. He mocked their army. And then he aimed for the deepest wound. He pointed to the ruins of every nation Assyria had already devoured, Hamath, Arpad, Samaria, and asked the question that no one on the wall could answer. "Where are the gods of those nations? Did any of them save their people from my hand?"
What makes your God different?"
Silence on the wall. Because the Rabshakeh was right about one thing. No god had saved Samaria. No god had saved Lachish. 46 fortified cities of Judah had already fallen. He is right. No god saved Samaria. No god saved... Hezekiah looked down at his own hands, the hands that had designed the wall, the hands that had ordered the tunnel, the hands that had been so sure they were enough. The temple was cold. The stone floor pressed against Hezekiah's knees as he knelt, not as a king. The royal robes were gone, torn from his body and replaced with sackcloth, the coarse garment of mourning and repentance. The smell of old incense hung in the air from the morning sacrifice. A priest standing near the inner curtain watched the king enter and slowly lowered his head. He had never seen a king kneel like this, not with dignity, but with desperation. "I built it. I built all of it. The wall, the tunnel, the armory, and none of it. None of it." He did not finish the thought. He did not need to. His forehead touched the cold stone. His hands, the builder's hands, lay open and empty on the floor. He did not call for his engineers. He did not consult his generals. He sent for the prophet Isaiah, the same man who had rebuked his preparations. And then Hezekiah did the one thing that no wall, no tunnel, and no weapon could do for him. He prayed. And Hezekiah the king and Isaiah the prophet, the son of Amoz, prayed because of this and cried to heaven. 2 Chronicles 32:20. Cried to heaven. Not whispered, not recited, cried. The Hebrew carries the weight of desperation, the sound a man makes when every human solution has been exhausted, and the only option left is God. Isaiah's response was immediate. God had heard, and the message was terrifyingly specific. "He shall not come into this city, nor shoot an arrow there, nor come before it with a shield, nor build a siege mound against it." Isaiah 37:33. Not a single arrow, not a single siege ramp. God would not merely delay the Assyrians, he would stop them completely. The walls held, the water flowed, but neither saved the city. A prayer did. And then there was nothing to do but wait. The walls were built, the water flowed, the prayer had been prayed. Hezekiah sat in the temple, Isaiah sat with him, and the city of Jerusalem, 100,000 souls behind 23 feet of stone, held its breath. Outside the temple, the sun set behind the Assyrian camp, and the last light of that day would be the last light that 185,000 men would ever see. The camp stretched across the hills outside Jerusalem like a second city. Thousands of fires flickered in the darkness, the smell of cook smoke and leather, and the sweat of an army that had marched 1,000 miles. Somewhere near the northern perimeter, a young soldier sat cross-legged outside his tent, turning a small clay disc between his fingers. It was from home. His mother had pressed it into his hand when he left. He set it down carefully, pulled his cloak tighter against the chill, and lay back. Tomorrow they would take the city. Tomorrow he would carry gold back to Nineveh. He closed his eyes. He woke in the dark, not because of noise, because of the absence of noise. The camp was never silent. There were always men coughing, fires cracking, horses shifting. But this silence was total, unnatural, a silence that pressed against the ears like water. He sat up. He reached for the man sleeping next to him. The body was cold. He pulled his hand back. He stood. He stepped out of the tent, and in the gray light before dawn, he saw. Row after row, tent after tent, men lying exactly where they had fallen asleep, eyes open, mouths open, not wounded, not bleeding, simply stopped, as if something had passed over them in the night and drawn the life out of every body it touched. They are, all of them. He could not finish the thought. There was no framework in his mind for what he was seeing. The clay disc from his mother lay in the dirt by his tent. He did not pick it up. He ran. On the eastern wall of Jerusalem, a watchman squinted into the dawn. The Assyrian camp was visible below, a vast, dark sprawl against the gray hills. But something was wrong. No smoke rose from the cooking fires, no movement between the tents, no morning formations, no sound. He turned to the man beside him. The man was already staring. They looked at each other. Neither spoke. Neither needed to. And the Lord sent an angel who cut off all the mighty warriors and commanders and officers in the camp of the king of Assyria. 2 Chronicles 32:21. 185,000 men dead. No battle. No arrow fired from the walls of Jerusalem. No Judean soldier drew a sword. The parallel account in 2 Kings 19:35 captures it in a single devastating sentence. And when they arose early in the morning, behold, these were all dead bodies. The greatest military machine the ancient world had ever produced, broken in a single night by a force no wall could have stopped and no tunnel could have redirected. The only sound that morning was the wind passing through a camp of empty armor. Sennacherib fled. The king who had trapped Hezekiah like a caged bird retreated to Nineveh in shame. And there, in the temple of his own god Nisroch, his own sons struck him down with the sword. Isaiah 37:38. The man who mocked the God of Israel died in the house of a God who could not protect him. Historians debate the mechanism. Some propose plague. Others suggest political unrest in Nineveh. Some argue the number is symbolic, but they do not debate the result. Sennacherib left, Jerusalem stood, and the kingdom of Judah survived for another century. Let that settle for a moment.
The tunnel survived. The spring still flows. And 700 years after Hezekiah's laborers swung their last axe, a man who had never seen light was told to wash his eyes at the end of that same tunnel. In John chapter 9, Jesus encounters a man who has been blind from birth. He spits on the ground. He makes mud with his hands. He anoints the man's eyes, and then he gives him a command. Go, wash in the pool of Siloam. John 9:7. The Apostle John pauses to translate the name. Siloam means sent. The water that was sent through Hezekiah's tunnel now heals a man sent by the one who was himself sent by the Father. The man kneels at the pool's edge. His fingers find the water, cool, flowing, fed from the same spring that had sustained a city under siege 7 centuries before. He cups his hands, he washes his eyes, and for the first time in his life, he opens them. The first thing he sees is light breaking on the surface of the water. The pool at the end of the tunnel, the reservoir that saved Jerusalem from physical death, becomes the place where Jesus restores spiritual sight. What Hezekiah built for survival, God repurposed for salvation. The spring that burst from the earth, the dark passage carved at impossible cost, the pool where sight was restored. The story of Hezekiah's tunnel did not end in the 8th century BC. It was waiting, and archaeology has confirmed it.
In 2004, during routine sewer work near the city of David, workers uncovered massive stone steps. Subsequent excavation revealed the true Pool of Siloam, not the small Byzantine-era bath that tourists had visited for centuries, but a monumental, stone-lined trapezoid nearly 225 feet wide, with 3 sets of 5 steps designed to accommodate the fluctuating water levels of the spring. Coins embedded in its plaster date to the Second Temple period. This is the pool. These are the steps where the blind man knelt. And in 2015, archaeologist Dr. Eilat Mazar unearthed something even more extraordinary in the Ophel, the area between the city of David and the Temple Mount. 2 personal clay seals, bully, pressed into the same archaeological stratum, found just feet apart. One reads, "Belonging to Hezekiah, son of Ahaz, king of Judah." The other bears the name of the prophet Isaiah. The king who built the tunnel and the prophet who rebuked him, side by side in the dirt. Separated by inches, united across 2,700 years. 2,700 years later, you can still walk through Hezekiah's tunnel. You can touch the pickaxe marks on the walls. You can feel the cold water around your ankles. And if you listen carefully in the darkness, if you hold still and let the silence settle, you might hear the echo of 2 teams of desperate men swinging toward each other through solid rock, trusting that they would meet. They met. But the thing that saved Jerusalem was not what Hezekiah built. It was the prayer he prayed when he realized that his building was not enough. What are you building right now that you have forgotten to surrender? What is the tunnel in your life, the thing you have worked hardest on, the thing you are most proud of, that you may need to lay at God's feet? If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe so you do not miss what is coming next. And leave a comment below. Tell me, what is your tunnel? Somewhere beneath the streets of Jerusalem right now, the water is still flowing. Through the dark, through the stone, from the spring to the pool, just as it has for 2,700 years, just as it was designed to.